NTA News 24, reaching you live from Abuja, the nation's capital. I am Abdul Malik Adio.
And I'm Elizabeth Omari. Thank you so much for joining us. Here are the headlines.
Necessary to extend the current restriction of movement in Lagos and Ogun states, as well as the FCT.
Lockdown extended for 14 days in Lagos, Ogun and the FCT to tackle the spread of coronavirus pandemic.
COVID-19 lockdown extension. President Buhari signs regulations number 2 of 2020.
Nigerian Center for Disease Nigerian Center for Disease Control confirms 20 new cases of COVID-19, bringing the number to 343.
Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 says war against COVID-19 is a must-win. Reveals 11 laboratories nationwide for COVID-19 testing.
And in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, President Muhammadu Buhari has issued the COVID-19 Regulations 2020 on March 30th, 2020, by which it declares COVID-19 a dangerous infectious disease. President Muhammadu Buhari, in exercise of the powers conferred on him by Section 3 and Section 4 of the Quarantine Act and all other powers enabling in that behalf, makes the following regulations: extension of regulation, cessation of movement in Lagos, FCT and Ogun State. These regulations are made further to the COVID-19 Regulations 2020, and accordingly, all the responsibilities of government officials, citizens and residents contained in the COVID-19 Regulations 2020 remains extant. Exemption in the COVID-19 Regulations 2020 extant. All exemptions under the COVID-19 Regulations 2020 remains an exemption under these regulations.
And President Muhammadu Buhari has announced additional 14 days extension of the current restriction order in Lagos, Ogun and the Federal Capital Territory as part of measures to fully tackle the spread of the coronavirus pandemic.
President Muhammadu Buhari, in a nationwide broadcast, says the adjustment becomes necessary following professional advice and briefing from the Presidential Task Force on Global Pandemic. Abubakar Akwanga reports.
President Muhammadu Buhari explains that the difficult decision was informed by the growing concern of global statistics on COVID-19 and the increasing figure in the country, which desperately requires tougher preventive measures and sacrifice from all Nigerians.
Our approach to the virus remains in 2 steps. First, to protect the lives of our fellow Nigerians and residents living here, and second, to preserve the livelihoods of workers and business owners. With this in mind, and having carefully considered the briefings and report from the Presidential Task Force and the various options offered, it has become necessary to extend the current restriction of movement in Lagos and Ogun states, as well as the FCT, for another 14 days, effective from 11:59 p.m. on Monday, 13th of April, 2020.
The president says available data of the virus from the Nigerian Center for Disease Control in Lagos, Ogun and the FCT represents 71% of recorded cases out of the 23 affected states. The Nigerian leader commends the 36 state governors for initiating proactive measures through various restrictions order imposed to contain the spread of the deadly virus and promised to strengthen commitment in high-risk states.
Many state governments have also made provisions for isolation wards and treatment centers. We will also build similar centers near our airports and land borders. Healthcare workers across all the treatment centers have been provided with the personal protective equipment that they need to safely carry out the care they provide.
The president says adequate measures have been put in place to sustain the fight against COVID-19. On the impact of the initial 2 weeks lockdown, the president says it has led to 92% of identified cases and commended the timely intervention of donors and other development partners in assisting federal government to mitigate negative impact of the virus and promised to sustain palliative measures to cushion the effect. Other measures include 7,000 trained health workers and their swift deployment to 19 states, doubles the number of testing laboratories in the country, and raised testing capacities to 1,500 tests per day, with Lagos and Abuja now equipped to admit 1,000 patients across treatment centers.
Palliative measures such as food distribution, cash transfers, and loans repayment waivers to ease the pains of our restrictive policies during this difficult time. These palliatives will be sustained. I have also directed that the current social register be expanded from 2.6 million households to 3.6 million households in the next 2 weeks. This means we will support an additional 1 million homes with our social investment programs. A technical committee is working on this and will submit a report to me by the end of this week. The security agency.
The president says the major space for the spread of COVID-19 is in communities and urged them to closely observe the infection prevention protection measures to curtail the spread of the virus, and appreciates effort of the traditional rulers, Christian Association of Nigeria, and the Supreme Council for Islamic Affairs and the media for sustained effort in succeeding the fight against COVID-19.
I am directing the ministers of industry, trade and investment, communication and digital economy, science and technology, transportation, aviation, interior, health, works and housing, labor and employment, and education to jointly develop a comprehensive policy for a Nigerian economy functioning with COVID-19. The ministers will be supported by the Presidential Economic Advisory Council and the Economic Sustainability Committee in executing this mandate. I am also directing the Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development, the National Security Advisor, the Vice Chairman, National Food Security Council, and the Chairman, Presidential Fertilizer Initiative, to work with the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 to ensure the impact of this pandemic on our 2020 farming season is minimized.
The president says he has no doubt that by working together and carefully following the rules, Nigeria will get over the global pandemic and emerge stronger in the end. In Abuja, Abubakar Usman Akwanga, NTA News.
In the meantime, Public Affairs Analyst Dr. Abdurrahman has commended President Muhammadu Buhari's directive for expansion of the social register by 1 million households within the next 2 weeks. Discussing President Buhari's broadcast on NTA's Good Morning Nigeria on the topic, Dr. Abdurrahman, however, expressed concerns over the lack of baseline data to track distribution of the palliatives.
That's right. People cannot even track to ascertain the veracity of the claims of government. So, and this is an emergency situation. An emergency situation in a country where there are no baseline, where census has not been able to determine the number of households. We've not even discussed what is the number of households, what makes up a given household, whether it is 6 persons, whether it is 7, whether it is 8.
The President's directive will ensure that government's palliative package gets to more families likely to be more affected by the lockdown order.
Another fresh case of COVID-19 in Ondo State has been confirmed by the Nigerian Center for Disease Control. The Ondo State Commissioner for Information, Donald Ojogo, explained that the new patient is an ex-Youth Corps member who is a medical doctor attached to the Army Clinic in the state. Correspondent Aburauf Kamaldeen reports that the youth doctor had contacted the virus while attending to the first recorded case while he was under observation.
And the Nigeria Center for Disease Control says as at 9:50 p.m. on the 13th of April, 20 new cases of COVID-19 have been reported in Nigeria, bringing the number of confirmed cases to 343. Of the 20 new cases, 13 are in Lagos, 2 in Edo, Kano and Ogun states each, while 1 is in Ondo. The NCDC says 91 patients have so far been discharged, while the death toll stands at 10. This new data of confirmed cases cuts across 19 states in Nigeria.
There are now 11 laboratories nationwide to test for COVID-19, with testing capacity increased to 1,500 tests per day and over 6,000 tests conducted so far.
Chairman of the task force and secretary to the government of the Federation, Boss Mustafa, who stated this at a daily briefing in Abuja, said the war against the pandemic is a must-win for the country. Mitai Rikme tells us more.
Taking stock of Nigeria's fight against COVID-19, members of the Presidential Task Force were confident that the initial 2-week restriction order in Abuja, Lagos and Ogun states has slowed down the spread of coronavirus in the country, even though it is not yet Uhuru.
The war is still raging, and all hands shall remain on deck until victory is assured.
Those that have immunosuppression, such as cancers, and those with chronic respiratory disease, it is important that this group keep away from persons who may have coronavirus.
To guard against community transmission of COVID-19, the Minister of Health emphasized increased use of the face masks by Nigerians.
It includes also the improvised homemade face mask or anything that covers your face, even a handkerchief or a scarf. If you're talking to someone and at least majority of it will be arrested on a mask. That's why we say that it must be washed every evening, preferably in warm water, and then dried and then ironed. If you do that, you are safe to reuse it the next day.
To facilitate the distribution of palliatives to cushion the effect of restrictions on Nigerians, the task force says the National Social Register is being expanded with focus on the urban poor and persons living with disabilities.
We have 4 pilot states that are on digital payment. We're using mobile phones, mobile wallets, the BVNs of these beneficiaries where it exists, because you know that it's not all of these beneficiaries that are on the banking system. So we look at all these issues and we're working on it.
The Presidential Task Force assured Nigerians that government will not fail to fulfill its responsibility of ensuring their safety and security at all times. In Abuja, Mitai Rikme, NTA News.
And you're watching the news at 10, reaching you live on NTA News 24. A break beckons. When we come back, there will be more news.
The coronavirus, also known as COVID-19, has been declared by the World Health Organization as a global pandemic. While clinical trials are ongoing for a vaccine and a possible cure, there is no known treatment for the coronavirus. Nigeria has recorded some of these cases, and people are advised to take these preventive measures to keep themselves safe and contain the further spread of the virus. Wash your hands frequently with soap and water, or use hand sanitizers all the time. Maintain social distancing. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. Practice respiratory hygiene. If you have fever, cough, and difficulty breathing, seek medical care early. Do not panic. Stop the spread of unconfirmed news. Follow the official government news outlets and report all cases immediately. This message is brought to you by the Nigerian Television Authority, NTA, Africa's largest television network.
Thanks for staying with us. The Northern State Governors Forum has resolved to strengthen preventive measures against the coronavirus pandemic through enhanced border controls and surveillance, as well as greater collaboration to ensure that there's synergy among them in movement restriction. Rising from a meeting conducted via teleconference chaired by the forum's chairman, Governor Simon Bakolalong of Plateau State, they noted that so far the lockdown in some states in the region has had varying levels of success, but also raised concerns that enforcing cross-border movements remain a challenge, as some of the cases recorded in some states were imported from outside despite the closure of borders by states. They agreed that at the moment each state would adopt the measures suitable to its setting, because a total lockdown of the region will come at a very high cost, since most of its citizens are farmers who need to go to farms since the rains have started. Another issue discussed by the Northern Governors was the issue of palliatives from the federal government, where they regretted that so far no state in the region has received a dime as special allocation, despite the fact that some of them have recorded cases, while others are making frantic efforts to prevent any outbreak, as well as prepare against any eventuality. As for testing centers, the governors lamented that the region has no testing centers, which is very disturbing. They resolved to again liaise with the federal government to ensure that each state at least gets one testing center, while highly populated ones get two. They consequently set up a 7-man committee chaired by Governor of Kebbi State, Atiku Abubakar Bagudu, to fashion out the economic impact of COVID-19 on the region and the way forward. Other members are governors of Kaduna, Sokoto, Kwara, Nasarawa, Jigawa, and Yobe states. The northern governors also commended President Muhammadu Buhari for the measures taken so far to deal with the pandemic and promised to do their part in working with the federal government to overcome the disease. The meeting of the governors was earlier presided by the meeting of secretaries to government of the 19 northern states, which was presided over by the President Secretary to the government of Plateau State, Professor Danladi Abok-Atu.
Now, more support is coming the way of the federal government to fight the coronavirus pandemic. The latest is the palliative items from the Friesland Campino Wamco Nigerian Limited, received by the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs, Disaster Management and Social Development. Ruth Aguele report.
Kabiru has been a driver for more than 15 years, but this trip to Abuja, which took him and his colleagues 2 days to accomplish, is one that enthusiasms him due to the importance of the goods he is carrying for the lives of vulnerable people at this trying time.
For me to accept to drive all those on the way from Lagos come down to Abuja, I'm happy for that.
They're conveying the relief items donated to the federal government by Friesland Campino Wamco Nigeria Limited, and the Minister of Humanitarian Affairs, Disaster Management and Social Development is on hand to receive on behalf of the federal government. For the Minister, this act of kindness has come at the right time when the federal government is reaching out to citizens to reduce the effect posed by the coronavirus pandemic.
This will go a long way in ameliorating the sufferings of poor and vulnerable citizens, and we must appreciate them for this support. We assure them that these items will go to the targeted beneficiaries. People are encouraged to come forward and support what government is doing, so that together we will fight this pandemic.
The essence behind this gesture, one, is to support Nigeria nutritionally, to help them improve their nutrition status in view of this COVID-19.
The food products, values at 100 million naira, is to be distributed to 100,000 vulnerable families across Nigeria to reduce hardships occasioned by restrictions brought about by COVID-19. In Abuja, Ruth Aguele, NTA News.
As Nigeria, alongside other countries, intensify efforts to contain the spread of the dreaded COVID-19 pandemic, nothing has been left to chance in reaching out to citizens in Nigeria.
Anthony Forson visited one of such facilities that provides prompt contact and mobilization, named FCT COVID-19 Situation Room.
Here is the FCT COVID-19 Situation Room. It is fitted with all communication facilities that provide prompt response to manage emergencies as well as monitor and track COVID-19 matters.
Hello, welcome to FCT Call Center. My name is Sarah. How may I help you? All right, we'll send one over right away. Thanks for calling. Where are you calling us from? How may we assist you, sir?
All you need is to call any of these emergency numbers: 080-9993-6313, 080-9993-6312, 070-8063-1500, or 070-4212-8340.
When we receive calls about COVID-related matter, we have the FCT Sampling Collection Center under the Department of Public Health. We send to them. But first of all, we need to get the person that called. We need to have your full details, your name, phone number, and address. We send them this information with the phone number of the person that calls. They, in turn, will now interrogate the person further to see if the person requires for them to go to the house and get a sample of the person taken before they test.
Aside from government officials assembled to enforce the restriction order, FCT volunteer youths have also come on board assisting to enforce the stay-at-home order and providing enlightenment.
Avoid overcrowded places, please. Maintain social distance. Do not go where there is visitation, marriages. Avoid crowded places.
In Abuja, Anthony Forson, NTA News.
Ekiti State has extended its lockdown order by 2 weeks to curtail the spread of COVID-19. Let's now join Kenneth Nanim for more update on COVID-19 from the states.
Decontamination of public places across the state. From Uyo, the Akwa Ibom State capital.
We'll bring you that report later. Apologies. Now, let's join Mr. David Akoji, a public analyst, to talk more on Mr. President's broadcast. Mr. David Akoji, it's nice to have you in our studio.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
All right, so what do you make of the extension of the lockdown in Lagos, FCT and Ogun State by President Muhammadu Buhari?
Well, the president in his speech has empathized with Nigerians. He has expressed the fact that those who took this decision were not unaware of the negative impact it might have on livelihoods in cities and communities. He has stressed the fact that it's a decision that is necessary to enable the authorities to contain this coronavirus pandemic. Now, he has also spoken about some of the gains which will feed into the coming 2 weeks to increase the success rate that government and those who are managing this pandemic have achieved. The President stated clearly that 92% of identified contacts have been traced. The implication of that is that we know those who have made contacts with people who have tested positive for the pandemic. And what that does for us is that they can be reached, they can be brought in, isolated, and treated to ensure that spread is contained. Now, this is going to be done in the following 2 weeks that people need to stay at home. It's a sacrifice that we all must make. And the President is stating that he's aware that people are suffering, that people are inconvenienced within this period. But then the choice is between staying healthy at home or exposing yourself and getting contaminated and affected and then spending a long time in hospital. So this is clearly the choices that is before Nigerians. And the President is mincing no words about this. The success of the efforts to contain this pandemic lies in our hands. And we need to support government in its efforts to contain the pandemic.
Now, the 1 million households have been added to the beneficiaries of the government palliative. This is a main stocks that many Nigerians are hungry. What do you make of this situation?
You know, the president expressed appreciation to Nigerians for taking care of their fellow Nigerians. In addition to the efforts that the federal government, as well as various states and local governments, and I can tell you this with authority, local governments are extending palliative measures. Now, don't get us wrong. The measures that are being put out there by federal, state, and local governments will not completely take the place of our own personal efforts to take care of ourselves. They're just palliatives, measures to reduce the suffering. And this is going on. Individuals, NGOs, multilateral organizations are also participating in ensuring that the suffering is reduced. It's a sacrifice that we all must make, and we need to make it so that we can all stay healthy.
Okay. All right. The president talked about the need to eliminate inconsistent measures and decisions. Have you identified some of such inconsistencies in the response by states?
Absolutely.
Okay.
For instance, before this time, some state governors had begun to relax the containment measures.
Okay.
Some state governments had asked that Christian and Muslim adherents can go to their places of worship and all of that. This is completely contradictory to what the authorities at the federal are saying in view of the seriousness of this pandemic. So the governors need to be liaising closely with the federal and the president so that we have unison of action. And then we are sure that while we are succeeding in one state, we are not failing in another.
Now, the president actually, called on various ministries to develop strategies to ensure COVID-19 does not have excessive impact on Nigeria. What is your own take as regards this?
Well, worldwide, the fear is that the COVID-19 pandemic is not just a health crisis, there is also an economic crisis. You know that commercial activities have considerably slowed down locally and internationally. Now, what the president is saying in that respect is that various ministries, departments, and organizations that are responsible for ensuring that this does not have lasting debilitating effect on our economy rise up to the occasion, that they become innovative and creative and put out measures that will ensure that the negative economic impact is ameliorated.
Okay, so what can you say about the issue of test kits in the country?
That is another area of significant success that should gladden our hearts. Within this period of 2 weeks lockdown before now, the authorities have achieved 1,500 testing capacity per day. That's coming up from about 500. So it's a tripling of that capacity. And what that means is that government will be able to move fast to test people, to identify cases, and to go into isolation and contact tracing so that the containment measures are successful.
Now, the number of cases of this coronavirus have doubled in Nigeria, even with the initial lockdown. What are some people are asking if the lockdown is really the solution, or how do you react to this?
Okay, it is indeed a fact that the lockdown achieved positive effects, especially in the city centers. But I work with the Risk Communication Committee of the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19. And I can tell you that our findings showed that in the outskirts and in the rural areas, not much success was achieved in the lockdown. People were defying the lockdown, still going to places, going to markets and doing their things, So this is a cause for worry. And this time around, you can see that there's some measure of enforcement on the lockdown. People are being forced to go back home when they are found on the road. As I speak with you, police, civil defense, and other security authorities are on the roads, and they are preventing people from defying this lockdown. And the health authorities are also explaining to them why it is necessary for people to remain in their homes and in their houses for this 2 weeks period while government is struggling to contain this pandemic.
All right, Mr. Koji, before we let you go, just on a lighter note, we hope you're observing social distancing.
Oh, absolutely. We are preaching it. Okay. So we're certainly observing it.
All right. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming to our studio.
Thank you.
All right. Nigerians mark Easter Monday yesterday, and this is a time when families are usually out having fun in parks with their children and basically eating and drinking with friends. But the COVID-19 has put a halt to all these activities this period.
And as Alika Opanachi Aurora reports, the Ariri silence was clear without the usual hustle and bustle of life.
This will be an Easter to be remembered for a long time to come. This is as federal government stay-at-home directive to protect Nigerians from the coronavirus affected one of the most important celebrations in the Christian calendar. Last year Easter Monday, that is 2019 Easter holiday, many of the recreational and amusement parks in the Federal Capital Territory were filled up with people. But today, these parks are empty due to the fear of the spread of COVID-19.
Today, everywhere is empty. Nothing is working. It's really a big problem. It will be a nice one coming to the park to just have fun, but we've seen it like this. It's not working, and everybody just at home.
The pandemic has not only impacted on the social life of citizens, but also on economic activities across the country.
You know, this is a private organization, and a park is a seasonal business. It was going to take us maybe 6 months before we are going to recover from this.
Last year, business was very good, but now, no business. After 3 weeks, wallah, no man can come here.
Every day we try to pray, may God stop this thing, so that everybody go there peace and continue what is doing before.
As many recall with nostalgia, the Easter celebration of last year and comparing it with that of this year, they appeal to the government to intensify efforts in eradicating the pandemic from Nigeria so that normal activities can resume. In Abuja, Alika Opanachi, Arua, NTA News.
Elizabeth, it's very interesting because I'm going to ask you a question and I already know the answer to it. How did you spend your Easter Monday?
I was actually at work.
And you're still watching the news at 10 on NTA News 24. More news when we return.
Clarification on COVID-19 loans by the Central Bank of Nigeria. Details when we return. Stay with us.
Now, agriculture beyond food crops and subsistence into animal husbandry, medicinal plant, poultry and forage experts say can improve national revenue base. Details with Khalil Mohammed.
The globe's efforts to fly into the future sustainably has attained fresh drives. Nations must put in place a number of imperatives in order to not fly blind into the future. Infrastructure, social investment, and paycheck protection all can be financed with sufficient cash at government's disposal. This calls for expansion of revenue base. A development professional says, away from taxes and oil, Nigeria should look at agriculture beyond food crops and subsistence.
Talking about agriculture, I'd like to stretch it a little bit. It's not agriculture for farming, but it is agriculture for inputs. Okay, because agriculture is not only about food crops. You know, agriculture is also about medicinal plants. Agriculture is also about animal husbandry. Agriculture is also about poultry. Agriculture is also about forage.
The current global pandemic and national epidemic has come through as sustainable time buyer for nations to realign economic imperatives.
We must be able to see the advantages that this situation has presented, and I think it has more advantages as a where than I see disadvantages. Okay, because we can be able to improve on our revenue. We can be able to improve even on our job creation. We can be able to improve on our human, capital. We can be able to improve on our national, food security. We can even improve on our national pharmaceuticals. Okay, I think this is a wake-up call for everybody. And again, not just a wake-up for us to be able to wake up and get confused, but a wake-up for us to be able to get up and then begin to now think it through.
And finally, after the Easter break, activities on the floor of the Nigerian Stock Exchange opened today for the week. As always, NTA Business News will bring you closing figures subsequently. I am Kolo Muhammad. Please do stay home, ensure healthy and thorough social distancing. Many thanks.
Thank you, Kolo Mohammed. And still from the financial sector, the Central Bank of Nigeria, CBN, says it does not charge fees on COVID-19 loan applications. Director Communications of the CBN, Isaac Okorafor, in a statement said it became necessary following false reports that owners of small-scale businesses who applied for loans provided to cushion the effect of COVID-19 are required to pay a certain amount as application processing fee. Okorafor stated that for the avoidance of doubt, there are clearly spelled out procedures for accessing the 50 billion naira targeted credit facilities stimulus package to support households and micro, small and medium enterprises affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, which are disbursed through Nestle Financial Bank. He advised members of the public, particularly owners of MSMEs, to disregard any message requiring them to pay processing fees and report any observed irregularity to the Consumer Protection Department of the CBN via an email tagged cpd@cbn.gov.ng.
Experts have predicted that the coronavirus pandemic could cost the global economy more than $4 trillion as it continues to ravage both developed and developing nations.
How is the pandemic affecting agribusiness in Africa, especially Nigeria? Musa Babalu looks at the global business and Nigeria's advantage.
It is no longer in doubt that the coronavirus pandemic has affected the social and economic well-being of millions of people in the world. Economic activities, agriculture inclusive, are almost at a standstill as more than 4 billion people around the world distance themselves from one another to slow the spread of COVID-19. Consequently, creating wide distance of more than $400 trillion between business, government and private pockets.
And this affects every other economy in the world because the world is a global village. It has this link to each other. One country does business with the other. So there is no way that any country now that is shut down will want to do business with, the other country that is equally shut down. So everywhere is standstill.
The United Nations World Food Programme says the pandemic is threatening global food supply and shortages for millions of people across the globe. African countries who depend on imports of foodstuffs are the worst hit. The analysis estimates that the pandemic could cost Africa between $37 billion and $79 billion this year.
But we also believe that second will come food. The food value chain needs to be kept alive to be able to have food available for consumers and to minimize the potential risk over undernourishment and, of course, poverty.
There is an indication that Nigeria will not be affected with the food crisis or shortages. But what might happen, as observed by agriculture economists, is high demand of Nigerian produce from West, East and Southern African nations.
Into it, like you see, strategic investments in rice, in cocoa, in oil palm. These are high-pressure items that impact on our foreign exchange reserves. And so the government of President Buhari has thought well by saying we need to diversify the economy. And the economic players now have the responsibility to work out that in that arrangement how we can play in that space. But that's the only way for us to go in this country.
If government continue to push for agricultural investment in agriculture and agro-allied businesses, among other things, from value chain to general agricultural farming, mechanized and all that, Nigeria will generate lots and lots of foreign exchange gain when it comes to exporting this product when we produce them in our farmlands around the country.
Already, farmers' groups are advocating federal and state governments to introduce a system that will boost income generation through international commodity trade.
And I think it is important for us to appreciate a government that brings about policies that are productive, that are progressive, that are positive, that are proactive, in such a way that the country benefits and ensures security of food, ensures security of lives.
Nigeria's agricultural sector has been enjoying steady growth for the past 6 years. The sector is expected to worth more than 9 trillion naira in the next few years. In Abuja, Musa Baba Aliyu, NTA News.
In an unprecedented move to stabilize the global oil market, the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, and its allies, OPEC Plus, as well as other producers, including the United States, have agreed on a supply adjustment of over 19 million barrels per day. The OPEC and OPEC Plus shares of the quart is 9.7 million barrels per day. Lydia Sampson has the details.
The agreement, which takes effect on May 1st, will be for a period of 2 years. In the words of OPEC Secretary General Mohamed Sanusi Barkindo, it was a historic conference in many respects. Extraordinary times caused by the COVID-19, unprecedented slump in the global economy and demand for oil. He commended the prompt, decisive response by the declaration of cooperation partners of about 19 million barrels per day global supply adjustments with the longest duration of 2 years, the triumph of international cooperation. U.S. President Donald Trump also applauds the move by oil. On his Twitter handle, he said, and I quote, "The big oil deal with OPEC Plus is done. This will save hundreds of thousands of energy jobs in the United States. I would like to thank and congratulate President Putin of Russia and King Salman of Saudi Arabia. I just spoke with them from the Oval Office. Great deal for all." OPEC and OPEC Plus share of the adjustment is 9.7 million barrels per day, while the other producers make up the total. In Abuja, Lydia Sampson, NTA News.
And from oil and gas, we now move to transportation. The federal government has taken delivery of additional train coaches as part of efforts to improve the rail system of transportation in the country. Correspondent Larry Bilay was at the main line Papalanto in Ogun State for first-hand information.
The delivery of the trains with coaches of different class of sittings is additional steps by the present administration and the drive to improve the rail system in the country. The diesel multiple unit DMU passenger trains was specifically built to meet the requirements of Nigerian environment, taking into consideration the socio-economic, cultural and physiological needs.
We call them diesel multiple unit because it's a sect and you have multiple heads. We are taking one to Abuja, Kaduna, and we commence our operation with one in Lagos, Ibadan. We are still expecting 44 more coaches. It would have been here by now, if not for the pandemic.
Each set of train has the capacity to take about 500 passengers at once and can move on a speed of 150 kilometers per hour.
It's unfortunate that we couldn't enter into these coaches. The reason why we couldn't enter is no thanks to COVID-19. The corporation is making some precautionary measures before it can be used. But now they are here, and there's no doubt that this 88 seating capacity, 56 seating capacity, and 24 seating capacity coaches will make Nigeria travel in style and comfort. From Papalanto Station in Ogun State, Larry Bilay, NTA News.
Now, President Muhammadu Buhari extends his good wishes to the people of Chibok, Borno State, as they hold prayers and Thanksgiving service to mark the 6th anniversary of the kidnapping of their daughters by Boko Haram terrorist group. President Muhammadu Buhari regrets that the current COVID-19 pandemic with restrictions on movement makes it impossible for any government delegation to be with them during this event. A statement by the Senior Special Assistant to the President on Media and Publicity, Garba Shehu, says the President notes that the issue of Chibok girls is not a forgotten issue. We cannot go to sleep over this matter. We are optimistic that ongoing effort will yield something positive, President Muhammadu Buhari assured. The effort by the nation's armed forces on the general operations in the entire region continue in their hope that they will encounter these girls as they did thousands of other hostages and bring them back home. President Muhammadu Buhari commends Yakubu Nkiki, Lawal Zaina, and Yana Galan, the executive officials of the Association of the Parents of Abducted Girls from Chibok, on their steadfast efforts to advocate for the welfare of the parents, the freed women, and those still in captivity.
And amidst lockdown, residents of border communities in Ogun State living in fear of criminals terrorizing them can now heave a sigh of relief following arrest of over 150 suspects alleged to be responsible for unrest and breach of peace in the state.
Anthony Godoni reports that the State Commissioner of Police paraded the suspect at Ifo Divisional Police Headquarters in Ogun State.
In the last 1 week, residents of Ifo, Agbado, Ijako, Abekoko, Okearo in Ifo local government area and Dalemo, Ijoko, Sango, Ota, Iju and other communities in Ado-Ota local government area of Ogun State have been living in fear due to the activities of hoodlums and criminals terrorizing the neighborhood. With complaints and distress calls, the police swung into action, launched aggressive attack on criminals, arrested over 150 of them, parading the suspects at Ifo Police Divisional Headquarters. The State Commissioner of Police, Kenneth Ebrison, attributed the success to the robust synergy between the police and other security agents in the state.
The operation was a success as the hoodlums were successfully dislodged and quite a number of them were arrested with their tools of trade.
Let me describe the activity of the police as very, very commendable.
The suspects, majorly young boys and girls, were arrested for alleged involvement in different crimes ranging from cultism, burglary, stealing, and hooliganism. In Abeokuta, Anthony Gandonu, NTA News.
Meanwhile, in the wake of recent activities of hoodlums and street urchins in the border communities between Lagos and Ogun States, the Inspector General of Police, Mohammed Adamu, has ordered the immediate deployment of additional intelligence and operational assets of the force, comprising Police Mobile Force Units, Federal Special Anti-Robbery Squad, Intelligence Response Team, and the Special Tactics Squad to Lagos and Ogun States to strengthen security and bolster public confidence in the affected areas. In a statement by Force Public Relations Officer DCP Frank Omba, the intervention team is being coordinated by Deputy Inspector General of Police DIG Peter Babatunde Ogunyo, a seasoned crime fighter who doubles as a DIG in charge of the Department of Research and Planning of the force, and the coordinating DIG for Southwest Geopolitical Zone. He is to immediately oversee the deployment of these additional assets to enhance public safety, public confidence, and general security in the two states. Meanwhile, the IGP has ordered commissioners of police across the country to immediately rejig the security architecture in their various commands to effectively tackle all emerging crimes associated with the COVID-19 lockdown. They are also to intensify patrols around residential areas, markets, shopping malls, and all critical national infrastructures in their jurisdictions.
Nigeria Meteorological Agency has elected a member of the World Meteorological Organization's Executive Council Capacity Development Panel. Out of the 24 meteorological regional training centers in the world, 4 from each of the 6 continents, NIMET is the only one elected by the WMO into the 12-member panel to represent all the regional training centers in the world. Professor Sani Abubakar Mashi describes this development as a milestone towards improving service delivery as regards to meteorology and weather-related issues within West Africa. He observed that this is worth celebrating as it is a clear and positive indication of the aggressive reform of the federal government in the Nigerian aviation sector.
You're still watching the news at 10 on NTA News 24, reaching live from Abuja. Just before we go, let's take a look at our stories.
Lockdown extended by 14 days in Lagos, Ogun and FCT to tackle the spread of coronavirus pandemic.
COVID-19 lockdown extension, President Buhari signs regulations number 2 of 2020.
The Nigerian Center for Disease Control confirms 20 new cases of COVID-19, bringing the number to 343.
Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 says war against COVID-19 is a must-win, reveals 11 laboratories nationwide for COVID-19 testing.
This is NTA News 24.
And thanks for staying tuned. And now to sports. Former Arsenal forward Danny Welbeck donates £10,000 worth of relief materials to his maternal home in Ghana. Details of this and more with the Sport Desk.
Former Manchester United and Arsenal striker Danny Welbeck has donated £10,000